My name is Michelle, 34 years old, and my own sister convinced my mother to uninvite my children and me from the annual family vacation because my kids were, quote, too depressing to be around since my husband left. As if that was not enough, my mother physically reached into my purse, pulled out my bank card, and held it up like a trophy to fund their trip. What they did not know was that I had already booked a far better trip for my kids, and my mother's theft was about to trigger a chain reaction that would ruin my golden child sister's life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. Sunday dinners at my parents' house in the affluent suburbs of Chicago were always a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as a wholesome family gathering. The dining room with its heavy mahogany table and stiff high-backed chairs always felt more like a courtroom where I was perpetually on trial. This particular Sunday evening was no different. The air was thick with the smell of my mother Linda's famous pot roast and the suffocating weight of her conditional love. I sat near the foot of the table exactly where I was always placed, dedicating my attention to cutting the roast beef on my 8-year-old daughter Lily's plate. My 10-year-old son Caleb sat quietly beside her, picking at his carrots. They were good children, quiet and well-behaved, but in this house their quietness was often weaponized against them. At the head of the table sat my father, David, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. Next to him, basking in the glow of my parents' undivided admiration, sat my younger sister, Ashley, and her husband, Kevin. Ashley was 31, flawless, and the undisputed golden child of our family. Kevin was 35, a corporate executive whose title changed every time my mother spoke about him to her friends. He was loud, arrogant, and currently dominating the conversation with a long-winded story about a massive international contract he was supposedly closing at his firm. My parents hung on his every word, nodding enthusiastically and offering sounds of deep admiration. I kept my head down, focusing on my children. I had learned long ago that invisibility was my best defense. Since my divorce a year ago, my status as the family scapegoat had only solidified. My parents viewed my broken marriage not as a tragedy that required their support, but as a personal embarrassment that tarnished their perfect suburban image. I was the cautionary tale, the struggling single mother working a desk job, while Ashley was the ultimate success story. The conversation inevitably shifted to the upcoming annual family vacation. For 15 years, we had taken a summer trip together. It was a tradition my mother controlled with an iron fist, dictating the destination, the itinerary, and who paid for what. This year, the chosen destination was a luxury resort in Hawaii. I had been saving diligently, believing the trip would be a much-needed escape for Caleb and Lily after a difficult year. "Let me just clear some of these plates," my mother announced, standing up from her chair with a bright artificial smile. She moved around the table, collecting the fine china. As she reached my side, she paused. My large leather tote bag sat open on the spare chair next to me. I was wiping a smudge of gravy off Lily's cheek and did not immediately notice my mother's hand slipping smoothly into my bag. It was only when I heard the distinct snap of my wallet opening that I turned my head. My mother stood there, holding my heavy metal Chase Sapphire credit card between her thumb and forefinger. She held it up high, catching the light of the chandelier, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face. "Mom, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight but controlled. "Put that back." She ignored my outstretched hand, waving the card in the air like she had just won a prize. "Oh, relax, Michelle," she said dismissively. "I just need this to pay the final $6,000 deposit for the Hawaii trip tomorrow morning. The travel agency called and said they need the funds to secure the Ocean View suites." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by the audacity. "You cannot just go into my purse and take my credit card, Mom. Give it back to me right now." Before my mother could respond, Ashley took a slow, deliberate sip of her Pinot Noir and set her glass down with a sharp clink. The sound cut through the dining room, demanding everyone's attention. "Oh, do not worry about packing for Hawaii," Michelle Ashley said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "You and your kids are not coming this year. Kevin and I talked about it, and honestly, we think your kids are just too depressing to be around since your husband walked out." It really brings down the vacation vibe. But thanks for sponsoring the trip. The dining room fell completely silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I looked at my children. Caleb's face had gone pale, his fork dropping onto his plate with a clatter. Lily shrank down in her chair, her small shoulders curling inward as if trying to disappear. They were old enough to understand the cruelty of their aunt's words. I looked at my parents, expecting some kind of reprimand, some basic parental defense of their grandchildren. Instead, my mother simply stood there clutching my credit card, while my father took another sip of his bourbon, completely unbothered. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the tears, the apologies, the desperate pleas for inclusion that had defined my 20s. They wanted me to fold under the pressure of their collective rejection. But I was not that woman anymore. You are going to take my money, but ban my children from a family vacation because you find their grief inconvenient, I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. Ashley rolled her eyes, leaning back in her chair. Stop playing the victim, Michelle. It is exhausting. Look at you. You are a low-level desk jockey, living a sad, single mom life. You bring that miserable energy everywhere you go. Kevin works 80 hours a week dealing with high-level corporate executives. He needs a luxury break without having to look at your long faces. Consider paying the deposit as rent for all the Sunday dinners Mom cooks for you. The sheer entitlement radiating from my sister would have broken me a few years ago. Instead, it fueled a cold, sharp clarity. I stood up slowly from my chair, placing my napkin deliberately on the table. My sad, single mom life. I repeated, locking eyes with Ashley. That is fascinating coming from you. Let us talk about why my husband left, shall we? He left because your perfect hardworking husband over there thought it would be a great idea to introduce him to his affair partner during that boys' weekend in Vegas, the same Vegas trip that Mom funded, by the way. Kevin's face lost all its color. He choked on his water, coughing violently into his napkin. Ashley whipped her head around to stare at him, her eyes wide with shock. That is enough, my father bellowed, slamming his fist down on the mahogany table so hard the crystal glasses rattled. You will not sit at this table and spread vicious lies about your brother-in-law just because you are bitter. You have always been a jealous, ungrateful scapegoat. Your sister and Kevin have a solid marriage. Kevin is under immense stress at work and he deserves this vacation. You are going to let your mother use that card, and you are going to apologize for trying to ruin this dinner. The absolute delusion in my father's voice was staggering. They were entirely willing to sacrifice my sanity and my children's emotional well-being to maintain the illusion of Ashley and Kevin's flawless life. My mother stood taller, clutching my credit card even tighter against her chest. You heard your father, Linda said firmly. You owe this family, Michelle. You ruined the family image with your messy divorce. Paying for this deposit is the absolute least you can do to make amends. Now sit down and stop making a scene in front of the children. I did not sit down. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. I unlocked the screen, opened my banking application, and navigated to the security settings. I held the phone up so they could all see the screen. With one decisive tap of my finger, a bright red banner appeared across the display. Card locked. I stated, my voice echoing in the silent room with freezing finality. Good luck with the deposits tomorrow morning. My mother's jaw dropped. She looked down at the heavy metal card in her hand, then back up at me, pure outrage contorting her features. You cannot do that. The travel agency will cancel the entire block of Ocean View suites if they do not get the funds by 9 a.m. Sounds like a personal problem, I replied smoothly. I turned to my children, my voice instantly softening. Caleb, Lily, grab your coats. We are leaving. My children practically scrambled out of their chairs, eager to escape the suffocating tension. I helped Lily into her jacket, entirely ignoring my parents' outraged sputtering. As I turned toward the front door holding my children's hands, Kevin let out a loud, arrogant scoff. Let her go, Linda. Kevin sneered, leaning back and crossing his arms. She is bluffing. She does not have the guts to actually ruin the trip. I will just run my corporate expense card for the deposit tomorrow morning. I can write it off as a client entertainment expense anyway. Let the sad desk clerk go back to her sad little life. I paused at the front door, my hand on the brass knob. I did not look back at them, but a genuine chilling smile spread across my face. I knew something Kevin did not. I knew exactly what would happen when he tried to run that corporate card tomorrow morning. Have a wonderful evening, I said to the room. I stepped out into the cool night air, closing the heavy door firmly behind me. As I walked down the driveway toward my car, a faint, high-pitched ping echoed from the dining room window. It was the sound of a notification on Kevin's phone. I could not see his face, but I knew that single notification was the beginning of the end for his arrogant charade. The long overdue reckoning had finally begun, and I held the absolute detonator. Ashley broke the silence first. Her laughter was sharp and entirely devoid of warmth. She swirled the red wine in her glass, looking me up and down with an expression of pure pity. Do not look so heartbroken, Michelle. It is the truth. You live a sad, single mom life. You work as a low-level desk jockey making pennies. You should be grateful Mom is even willing to use your card to let you contribute to something luxurious. We are doing you a favor. Your miserable energy just drags everyone down. You have not smiled in a year, and frankly, Kevin and I are exhausted by your constant need for sympathy. We work hard for our money, and we deserve to enjoy our Hawaiian vacation without your storm clouds ruining the beach. My hands rested quietly on the mahogany table. I looked at Ashley, and then at Kevin, who was nodding in agreement. A smug little smile played on his lips as he took a sip of his water. I did not cry. I did not shrink into my chair like I usually did. The anger that had been simmering inside me for years suddenly crystallized into something entirely different. It was pure, icy clarity. The days of me absorbing their abuse to keep the peace were officially over. My miserable energy, I repeated. My voice was so steady it seemed to lower the temperature in the room. That is a fascinating perspective, Ashley. Let us talk about why I have a sad single mom life, shall we? Ashley rolled her eyes and sighed loudly. Oh, please, are we really going to rehash your failed marriage right now? We are all sick of hearing about it. Yes, we are, I said, leaning forward. Because you just brought it up. My husband left me because your perfect, hard-working husband, sitting right next to you, thought it would be a hilarious idea to introduce him to a cocktail waitress during that boys' weekend in Las Vegas. The dining room fell into a stunned, breathless void. Kevin choked on his water. He hacked violently into his linen napkin, and his face instantly turned a mottled shade of crimson. Ashley whipped her head around to stare at him. Her jaw practically hit the floor as she watched him avoid her gaze. That is right, Ashley, I continued, my voice sliced through the heavy air. Kevin introduced them. Kevin bought them the drinks. Kevin covered for him when he stayed out all night. And the best part, that entire Vegas trip was funded by Mom. Mom paid for the very weekend that destroyed my family. My father slammed his heavy fist down on the table. The crystal glasses jumped and clattered against the fine china. That is enough, he bellowed. His face was dark with rage. You will not sit at this table and spread vicious, ungrateful lies about your brother-in-law just because you are bitter and alone. I did not flinch. They are not lies, Dad. I saw the receipts. I saw the text messages. I saw the entire paper trail. But you all refused to look at it because acknowledging the truth would mean admitting your golden son-in-law is a fraud. My mother stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. She gripped my credit card so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Michelle, you stop this ridiculous temper tantrum immediately. Kevin is a senior executive. He works 80 hours a week dealing with high-profile corporate clients. He is under immense pressure and he deserves a luxury break without having to deal with your relentless victim complex. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. You owe this family, Michelle. You ruined our pristine image with your messy public divorce. You made us the subject of neighborhood gossip. All of my friends at the country club were asking questions I could not answer. We have supported you. We let you come to Sunday dinners, and we tolerate your depressing presence. Paying for this Hawaii deposit is the absolute least you can do to make amends for the embarrassment you have caused us. Now you are going to sit down, shut your mouth, and apologize to your sister and Kevin for trying to ruin this beautiful evening. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. For my entire life, her approval was the only currency that mattered. I had bent over backwards. I accepted every insult and swallowed every indignity just to keep the peace. I looked at Caleb and Lily. My brave, sweet children were watching me with wide eyes. They were waiting to see if their mother would once again surrender to the family bullies. I did not sit down. I did not raise my voice to match her screaming. I simply reached into the pocket of my slacks and pulled out my cell phone. "What are you doing?" my mother snapped. Her eyes darted to the device in my hand. "Put that away and answer me." I unlocked the screen with a quick swipe. I opened my banking application and bypassed the main menu. I navigated directly to the security and card management settings. The interface loaded instantly. It displayed the exact Chase Sapphire card my mother was currently clutching in her fist like a hostage. I held the phone up and turned the screen outward so my parents Ashley and Kevin could all see the display perfectly. I looked my mother dead in the eye. I raised my index finger and firmly tapped the toggle switch on the screen. A bright red banner flashed across the display to confirm the action. "Card locked," I stated. My voice echoed in the silent dining room with absolute freezing finality. "Good luck with the deposits tomorrow morning." My mother gasped. She took a physical step back as if I had struck her. Her jaw dropped open in sheer outrage. She looked down at the heavy metal card in her hand and then back up at me. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. "You cannot do that. The travel agency will cancel the entire block of Ocean View suites if they do not get the funds by 9 in the morning." "Sounds like a personal problem," I replied smoothly. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. I turned to my children. My posture relaxed and my tone instantly softened. "Caleb, Lily, grab your coats. We are leaving." My children practically scrambled out of their heavy wooden chairs. They were eager to escape the suffocating tension of the dining room. I helped Lily slide her arms into her denim jacket. I entirely ignored my parents' outraged sputtering and my sister's shocked silence. I grabbed Caleb's backpack from the corner and slung it over my shoulder. As I turned toward the front door, holding my children's hands securely in mine, Kevin finally found his voice. He let out a loud, arrogant scoff. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms over his chest. He desperately tried to project the image of an unbothered, wealthy executive. "Let her go," Linda Kevin sneered. His voice dripped with condescension. "She is bluffing. She does not have the guts to actually ruin the family trip. She is just throwing a tantrum because she knows she is a failure. That card will work fine tomorrow. And even if she did lock it, who cares? I will just run my corporate expense card for the deposit in the morning. I can write the whole $6,000 off as a client entertainment expense anyway. Let the sad desk clerk go back to her sad little life." I paused at the front door. My hand rested on the cool brass knob. I did not turn around to look at them. I did not need to. A genuine, chilling smile spread across my face. Let him think I was just a desk clerk. Let him boast about his unlimited corporate funds. I knew something Kevin did not. I knew exactly what would happen when he tried to run that corporate card tomorrow morning. "Have a wonderful evening," I said clearly to the room. My voice was light and completely unbothered. I stepped out into the cool night air. I guided Caleb and Lily onto the front porch and pulled the heavy door firmly shut behind me. It cut off my mother's screaming mid-sentence. As I walked down the paved driveway toward my car, a faint, high-pitched ping echoed loudly from the dining room window. It was left open to the evening breeze. It was the distinct sound of an urgent email notification on Kevin's phone. I could not see his face, but I knew the exact contents of that message. I knew that single notification was the beginning of the end for his arrogant charade. The long overdue reckoning had finally begun, and I was the one holding the absolute detonator. The drive away from my parents' house was quiet. The streetlights washed over the interior of my car in a steady rhythm. In the rearview mirror, I could see Caleb staring out the window. His small shoulders were slumped. Lily was holding her stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest. The silence was thick, but it was not the terrifying walking on eggshells silence we usually experienced after a family dinner. It was the quiet of a severed tie. Mom Caleb spoke up finally. His voice was hesitant. Why does our family not want us in Hawaii? Are we really too depressing? My hands tightened on the steering wheel, but I kept my breathing slow and even. I did not offer him a tragic, victimized explanation. I refused to let my children inherit the generational trauma of being the family scapegoats. Listen to me, Caleb, I said clearly, making sure my voice carried over the soft hum of the engine. You and your sister are the brightest, most wonderful parts of my life. Your aunt and uncle are small-minded people who care more about looking perfect than being good. They do not want us in Hawaii because they know we see right through their fake smiles. But do not worry about their vacation. We are not going to be sitting around being sad. I turned down our street. The neighborhood was quiet and lined with modest brick houses. My house looked exactly like the others on the block. It had a neat lawn, a standard driveway, and an unassuming front porch. It was the perfect camouflage for a sad, single mother working a desk job. Or at least that is what my family believed. I parked the car in the garage and ushered the kids inside. Once their coats were hung up and their hands were washed, I told them to come sit with me in the living room. I walked over to my home office desk and retrieved my encrypted laptop. I brought it over to the sofa and flipped the screen open. The glow of the monitor illuminated their curious faces. I want to show you both something, I said, typing in my master password. I knew your grandmother and your aunt were going to pull a stunt like this. They do it every single year. They dangle a family trip in front of us, and then snatch it away at the last second to make us feel small. I stopped playing their game a long time ago. I opened my personal travel file and clicked on a high-resolution PDF. A breathtaking image filled the screen. It showed crystal clear turquoise water, pristine white sand beaches, and a sprawling villa built directly over the ocean. Caleb leaned forward and his eyes widened. Where is that? That is a private island resort in Fiji, I told him. And we are leaving on Thursday, just the three of us. Lily gasped. Are we really going there? How can we go there? Because I booked it a month ago, I explained with a warm smile. I secured us VIP first-class tickets on a private charter. When we land, a seaplane will take us directly to our villa. You two will have your own private pool, and the resort has a marine biology camp where you can learn to scuba dive. We do not need Hawaii. We certainly do not need to share a cramped hotel suite with people who do not appreciate us. The pure, unadulterated joy that washed over my children's faces was worth every single dollar I had spent. They spent the next 20 minutes scrolling through the resort photos, pointing at the water slides and the tropical fish. The heavy, depressing burden my sister had tried to place on their shoulders vanished completely. Once I had tucked them into bed and kissed their foreheads, I returned to the living room. The house was completely silent. I walked back to my laptop and closed the Fiji itinerary. I took a deep breath and let the facade of the struggling suburban mother fall away. I opened a secured virtual private network and logged into the main server of my actual life. The screen transitioned to a sleek, dark interface bearing the gold crest of Apex Global Logistics and Concierge. I was not a low-level desk jockey making pennies. I was the sole founder and chief executive officer of a multi-million-dollar empire. 5 years ago, when my family thought I was just scraping by doing data entry, I had started a boutique travel concierge service for wealthy clients. That small venture had exploded. Apex Global now managed elite travel logistics, corporate retreats, and high-level expense audits for Fortune 500 companies across the globe. My family had absolutely no idea. I kept my wealth entirely hidden behind a maze of shell companies and non-disclosure agreements. I drove a standard sedan. I lived in a modest house. I wore unbranded clothes to Sunday dinners. I did it because I knew exactly who my mother and sister were. If they knew I had money, they would have bled me dry while still treating me like garbage. Keeping my success a secret was the ultimate protective shield. I scrolled through my executive dashboard reviewing the daily reports from my global teams. My London office had just secured a private jet fleet contract. My New York division had successfully planned a massive corporate merger retreat. The numbers rolling across my screen represented millions in pure profit. Kevin boasting about his $60,000 salary bonus earlier tonight was comical in comparison. I was about to shut down the server and pack for Fiji when a priority notification flashed in the upper right corner of my screen. It was an urgent communication from Marcus, who was my lead corporate auditor. Apex Global had a highly lucrative division dedicated to forensic accounting. Corporations hired us to audit their executive travel and expense accounts to root out fraud and wasteful spending. Marcus ran a team of ruthless financial analysts who combed through receipts and corporate cards looking for discrepancies. I clicked on the urgent email. The subject line read, "High priority discrepancy found in new client audit." I opened the attached file. My eyes scanned the executive summary Marcus had prepared. We had just onboarded a massive new corporate client last week. They had hired Apex Global to conduct a quiet internal sweep of their regional sales directors before a major merger went public. I read the name of the new client firm. A cold, sharp thrill ran straight down my spine. It was Kevin's exact employer. I leaned closer to the screen. I pulled up the specific division file Marcus had flagged. The report detailed an extensive network of suspicious travel expenses, vendor invoices, and corporate card charges. All of them were routed through a single regional sales director. I opened the employee profile attached to the fraudulent charges. Kevin's smug professional headshot stared back at me. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with perfect clarity. Kevin was not begging my mother for a bridge loan because he was stressed or waiting on a bonus. Kevin needed my Chase Sapphire card because his corporate accounts were currently frozen by his employer. They were frozen because my own firm was actively investigating him for gross financial misconduct. I stared at the glowing screen while the reality of the situation washed over me. I was the one holding the audit that would determine his entire future. The very desk clerk he had mocked just an hour ago was the chief executive officer reviewing his termination files. I slowly smiled in the quiet darkness of my living room. The game was entirely mine to win. The soft morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting a warm glow across the marble countertops. Michelle stood at the espresso machine, calmly steaming milk for her morning latte. The house was filled with the comforting sounds of a normal Monday morning. Caleb and Lily sat at the kitchen island eating their oatmeal and talking animatedly about coral reefs and sea turtles. They had spent an hour before bed researching Fiji, and the excitement radiating from them was the greatest reward Michelle could ever ask for. There were no tears about being excluded from the Hawaii trip. There was only pure, unadulterated joy for the adventure ahead. Michelle kissed the top of Caleb's head and packed Lily's favorite snacks into her lunchbox. She walked them to the front door, handed them their backpacks, and watched them board the yellow school bus at the corner of the street. Once the house was completely quiet, Michelle walked back into the kitchen and picked up her cell phone from the counter. She had placed the device on strict do not disturb mode the moment she walked out of her parents' house the night before. She knew exactly what kind of digital storm would be waiting for her. She swiped up to unlock the screen, and the barrage of notifications instantly flooded the display. There were 74 unread text messages, 18 missed calls, and 6 new voicemails. The sheer volume of digital harassment was a glaring testament to her family's toxic entitlement. They genuinely believed they could bully her into submission through sheer relentless force. Michelle carried her coffee to the living room sofa and sat down. She opened the family group chat and began to scroll through the onslaught of messages. Her mother, Linda, had started texting at 6 in the morning. The initial messages were sharply demanding but quickly spiraled into furious threats. Linda wrote that the travel agency had attempted to process the final deposit on the locked Chase Sapphire card, and the transaction was immediately declined. The agent had apparently called Linda in a panic, warning her that if the remaining $6,000 was not paid in full by Friday morning, the entire promotional budget package would be completely canceled. They would lose their initial deposits, and the Hawaii trip would be permanently voided. Linda's texts became increasingly unhinged. She threatened to completely disown Michelle. She typed in all capital letters, demanding that Michelle call her bank immediately to authorize the charge. She claimed Michelle was acting like a petulant child and deliberately attempting to embarrass the family in front of the travel agency. Michelle took a slow sip of her coffee and switched over to the private messages from her sister. Ashley had abandoned text messages entirely and opted for furious voice notes. Michelle tapped the play icon on the first audio file. Ashley's shrill, panicked voice echoed through the quiet living room. "You are an absolute monster," Michelle Ashley shrieked through the phone speaker. "You are doing this on purpose because you are a bitter, jealous spinster. You cannot stand the fact that Kevin and I have a beautiful, successful marriage while your husband ran away from you. You are intentionally trying to destroy my happiness because you are miserable. Unlock the card right now, or I swear I will never let you see your niece and nephew again. You are pathetic." Michelle did not flinch. She simply let the audio file play to the end and tapped the next one. Ashley continued her tirade, demanding the money and insisting that Kevin was far too busy with his high-profile corporate deals to deal with a declined credit card. Ashley claimed Kevin was furious and that Michelle was lucky Kevin did not sue her for emotional distress. The absolute delusion of the threat made Michelle let out a soft, genuine laugh. If Ashley only knew the truth about her husband's high-profile corporate deals, she would be the one begging for a lifeline. Michelle closed the voice notes and opened her voicemail inbox. There was a long 3-minute message from Linda. Michelle pressed the phone to her ear and listened to her mother's icy, calculated voice. Linda had completely dropped the aggressive screaming from the night before and transitioned into her signature brand of psychological manipulation. "Michelle, you need to stop this ridiculous behavior right now," Linda said smoothly. "You are acting out of pure spite, and it is completely unacceptable. Ashley deserves this luxury vacation. She has kept her family together. She has supported a highly successful executive husband. She has done everything right. You, on the other hand, have been a massive disappointment. You failed at your marriage, and you ruined the pristine image we worked so hard to build in this community. You should be on your knees thanking us for even allowing you to sit at our table for Sunday dinners. We let you and your children into our home out of pity. Now you are going to unlock that card and transfer the $6,000 immediately. If you do not do this by Friday, you are permanently erased from this family. Do not test me, Michelle." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. Michelle slowly lowered the phone to her lap. For her entire adult life, those exact words would have sent her into a spiraling panic. She would have cried. She would have apologized. She would have transferred the money just to buy back a fraction of her mother's conditional affection. She would have sacrificed her own financial security to ensure Ashley got her luxury vacation, because that was the role she was assigned at birth. She was the scapegoat expected to carry the burdens of the golden child. But sitting there in the morning light, Michelle felt absolutely nothing but a profound sense of liberation. The invisible strings her mother had used to control her for 34 years were permanently severed. The manipulation simply did not work anymore. Her mother's ultimate threat of disownment did not feel like a punishment. It felt like a glorious, desperately needed prize. Michelle calmly deleted the voicemail. She did not send a reply to the group chat. She did not answer Ashley's frantic voice notes. She simply closed the messaging application and put the phone on silent once again. They wanted a reaction. They wanted a fight. Giving them absolute silence was the most powerful weapon she possessed. Michelle stood up from the sofa and carried her empty coffee mug to the kitchen sink. It was time to transition from the targeted scapegoat to the chief executive officer. She walked down the hallway and entered her dedicated home office. The room was soundproofed and strictly off-limits to anyone else. It was the command center for Apex Global Logistics and Concierge. She sat down in her ergonomic leather chair and pressed her finger against the biometric scanner on her desk. The heavy-duty dual monitors hummed to life. She typed in her complex security credentials and accessed the encrypted corporate network. Her dashboard loaded, displaying the global operations of her massive empire. The frantic, petty demands of her family felt thousands of miles away from the high-stakes corporate world she secretly dominated. Michelle bypassed her daily logistics reports and navigated directly to the highly restricted forensic accounting server. She opened the secure messaging portal and sent a brief encrypted message to Marcus, her lead corporate auditor. She instructed him to prioritize the newly acquired audit file and route all findings directly to her personal executive inbox. She wanted sole control over the investigation into Kevin's corporate division. Within seconds, Marcus replied, confirming the directive. He stated that the initial sweep had uncovered extensive irregularities and that the full diagnostic report was ready for her immediate review. Michelle clicked on the flashing red icon in her inbox. The comprehensive audit file downloaded onto her secure drive. She opened the dossier and maximized the window across both of her large monitors. The header of the document boldly displayed the name of Kevin's employer, a massive logistics corporation that had blindly trusted their regional sales directors with unlimited expense accounts. Michelle leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. She bypassed the executive summary and scrolled directly down to the detailed itemized ledgers. She was no longer looking at the situation as an angry sister-in-law. She was looking at it with the cold, ruthless precision of a corporate auditor who specialized in destroying fraudulent executives. She took a deep breath and began to trace the digital paper trail of stolen money, preparing to uncover exactly how Kevin had been funding Ashley's golden child lifestyle. She knew the explosive truth was buried right there in the numbers, just waiting to be dragged into the light. The glare of the dual monitors washed over my face as I began to dissect Kevin's corporate life. The proprietary audit software developed by Apex Global was designed to be merciless. It did not care about executive titles or corporate hierarchy. It only cared about numbers, and Kevin's numbers were a catastrophic mess. I pulled up the primary ledger for his division and initiated a deep scan macro. The progress bar hummed along the bottom of the screen while I took another sip of my coffee. I watched as lines of data populated the right monitor. Marcus had categorized the initial red flags into 3 distinct tiers. Tier 3 was minor policy violations like upgrading to premium economy without authorization or expensing personal meals during layovers. Tier 2 involved questionable client entertainment charges. Tier 1 was outright fraud. Kevin's file was practically glowing red with Tier 1 alerts. I clicked into the first flagged folder. It contained the expense reports for the past 12 months. Kevin loved to hold court at my parents' dining room table, boasting loudly about the massive international contracts he was closing. He would swirl his expensive bourbon and complain about the grueling hours required to manage global logistics. He claimed he was single-handedly keeping his firm profitable. I opened the corresponding revenue reports provided by his employer. I cross-referenced his travel dates with the actual signed contracts in his division. The discrepancy was glaring and absolute. Kevin had not closed a single $1 million deal in over 8 months. In fact, his personal sales numbers were the lowest in his entire regional division. Yet his travel and entertainment expenses were 3 times higher than the top-performing executives. I dug deeper into the specific trips. There was a week-long trip to London marked as crucial client acquisition. Kevin had expensed first-class flights, a suite at the Savoy, and $5,000 in corporate dining. I ran the names of the clients he supposedly met with through our global registry database. The companies did not exist. They were fictitious shell entities registered to a post office box in Delaware. He had forged the financial travel documents entirely. He created fake client profiles, generated fake meeting itineraries, and submitted fake vendor invoices. The sheer audacity of the embezzlement was staggering. He was not just padding his expenses, he was actively creating elaborate fictional business trips to funnel corporate funds directly into his own pockets. I watched the digital paper trail weave its way through the accounting system. He would submit an invoice for a $10,000 corporate event hosted by a third-party vendor. The vendor was a dummy corporation set up under an alias. The corporation would receive the funds from his employer and immediately wire the money into an offshore account that Kevin controlled. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. The rhythmic clicking of my mouse was the only sound in the quiet office. I opened another folder labeled Corporate Gifting and Client Retention. This was where the reality of Ashley's lavish lifestyle began to take shape on my screen. My sister was the undisputed golden child. She loved to flaunt her wealth. She looked down on my sensible shoes and my modest home. She constantly reminded me that her husband was a provider who gave her the luxury she inherently deserved. I started matching Kevin's fraudulent expense claims to Ashley's social media timeline. The correlation was undeniable. In October, Kevin submitted a reimbursement claim for $8,000. He categorized it as high-level client retention gifts for a major tech firm in Silicon Valley. The invoice detailed custom leather goods and luxury spa packages. I opened Ashley's public social media profile on my secondary monitor and scrolled back to October. There was a photo of her posing in front of a mirror, holding a brand new limited edition designer handbag. The caption read, "Best husband ever spoiling me just because." The cost of that exact handbag matched Kevin's fraudulent invoice down to the cent. In December, Kevin expensed a massive corporate retreat in Aspen. He claimed he was hosting 12 regional managers for a team-building intensive. The expenses included luxury ski chalets, premium equipment rentals, and thousands in catering. I checked Ashley's feed. December featured a week-long romantic getaway in Aspen. It was just Ashley and Kevin drinking champagne in a private hot tub. The corporate funds had paid for their entire winter vacation. The monthly lease payments for Ashley's pristine white Mercedes were buried under a recurring vendor charge labeled Executive Ground Transportation Services. Her weekly trips to the luxury medical spa were coded as health and wellness consulting for employee retention. Every single aspect of her perfect golden child existence was funded by stolen money. She was parading around the country club, playing the role of the wealthy, successful wife, while her husband was systematically robbing his employer blind. I thought about the brutal voicemail my mother had left me just an hour ago. She explicitly stated that Ashley deserved a luxury Hawaiian vacation because she had kept her marriage intact. My mother had the absolute audacity to call me a failure. She demanded I be grateful for the pity they showed me by allowing me to attend Sunday dinners. The hypocrisy was so thick I could practically choke on it. My marriage might have ended, but at least it was built on a foundation of reality. Ashley's entire life was a fragile house of cards, built on corporate fraud and grand larceny. I turned my attention back to the Apex Global dashboard. I needed to understand the exact timeline of the current crisis. Why was Kevin so utterly desperate for my credit card last night? He had sneered at me and claimed he would just use his corporate expense card to cover the $6,000 deposit for the Hawaii trip. He had called me a sad desk clerk and boasted about writing the vacation off as client entertainment. I accessed the active security logs for his employer's corporate accounts. Apex Global had initiated the preliminary audit phase late Thursday afternoon. Our automated systems immediately recognized the massive irregularities in Kevin's regional division. According to standard operating procedure, our software issued a hard freeze on all related financial assets to prevent further embezzlement while the manual audit was conducted. I looked at the timestamps on the security log. Kevin's corporate credit cards were officially frozen on Friday morning at 9 o'clock. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. I let out a sharp breath as the entire puzzle locked perfectly into place. Kevin knew his cards were frozen. He had known since Friday. He probably tried to buy a coffee or pay for a business lunch, and the transaction was humiliatingly declined. He knew the walls were closing in, but he could not admit the truth to Ashley or my parents. He had spent years cultivating the image of the invincible wealthy executive. Admitting that his company had frozen his assets would shatter the illusion. Furthermore, he literally did not have the personal cash to cover the Hawaii deposit. Based on the sheer volume of his embezzlement, his personal accounts were likely severely overdrawn, just trying to maintain the facade of their lifestyle when the stolen funds temporarily dried up. He went to Sunday dinner trapped in a corner. The travel agency needed the $6,000 by Monday morning, or the entire block of Ocean View suites would be canceled. If the trip was canceled, Ashley would demand answers. Linda would demand answers. The perfect facade would crack. Kevin was desperate. He needed a scapegoat. He needed a victim. And there I was sitting at the foot of the table exactly where I was always placed. He and my mother had orchestrated the entire scene. They deliberately provoked me. They used my divorce and my supposed poverty as weapons to break me down so my mother could physically steal my Chase Sapphire card. They needed my money to bridge the gap and save Kevin from exposure. They were willing to ban my children from a family vacation just to justify taking my funds. Kevin did not have a corporate card to run tomorrow morning. He had absolutely nothing. He was standing on the edge of a cliff, and I was the one who had just cut his safety rope by locking my account. The panic he must be feeling right now was astronomical. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair and folded my hands neatly in my lap. I stared at the glowing screens illuminating the dark office. The digital evidence of Kevin's crimes was cataloged, indexed, and ready for prosecution. My team of auditors had done their jobs perfectly. The final report was compiled and waiting for my authorized signature. Once I signed that document, the file would be transmitted directly to the chief financial officer of Kevin's corporation, and the federal authorities would automatically be notified of the embezzlement. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of bitterness or petty jealousy. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 34 years being treated like dirt on the bottom of her family's shoes, only to discover she was suddenly holding the absolute power over their entire existence. My mother had threatened to erase me from the family if I did not submit to her demands. She thought she was the ultimate authority. She thought her conditional love was the most powerful weapon in the world. She had no idea that I held the absolute detonator to Kevin's career and Ashley's fake perfect life. I was no longer the invisible struggling single mother. I was the executioner. I reached for my mouse and hovered the cursor over the final authorization button on the audit report. I could send it right now and end Kevin's life before the sun fully rose. But that would be too easy. That would be too quick. They had spent years torturing me slowly and methodically. They deserved to experience the full, terrifying weight of the consequences. I decided to let them sweat. I would let the travel agency cancel their Hawaiian vacation. I would let Ashley throw her tantrums and let my mother issue her empty threats of disownment. I would let Kevin panic as his web of lies began to unravel piece by piece. I was going to press the button, but I was going to do it on my exact terms. I locked my computer screens and walked out of the office to make my children breakfast. The Hawaiian vacation was officially canceled, but our private flight to Fiji was departing in exactly 3 days. The reckoning was going to be spectacular. The text message from my mother arrived precisely at 7 in the morning on Tuesday. It was 3 days before their supposedly grand Hawaiian departure, and 3 days before my own private flight to Fiji. The message was entirely devoid of the capital letters and hysterical threats she had been hurling at me all weekend. Instead, it was carefully crafted to sound like a desperate plea for family unity. She demanded an emergency family intervention at the Roost, an obscenely overpriced artisan coffee shop in the center of our upscale suburb. She stated that Kevin was facing a medical crisis due to stress, and that we needed to put our differences aside for the sake of his health. I arrived at the coffee shop exactly 5 minutes late. I wanted them to sit with their anxiety. I pushed open the heavy glass doors, and the rich scent of freshly roasted espresso beans washed over me. I scanned the bustling room. My family was tucked away in a corner booth, trying to maintain a facade of casual elegance while practically vibrating with nervous energy. I ordered a flat white at the counter and took my time paying. I did not rush. I smoothed out the front of my tailored navy blazer. I had deliberately chosen an outfit that whispered quiet authority. It was a subtle shift from the bland cardigans I usually wore to Sunday dinners. When I finally approached their table, the shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. My mother, Linda, was practically gripping her porcelain teacup like a lifeline. Ashley sat slumped against the leather booth with her arms tightly crossed over her chest. Her designer sunglasses were pushed up into her hair and her mouth was fixed in a permanent, petulant scowl. But it was Kevin who truly captured my attention. The arrogant, invincible corporate executive from Sunday night had completely vanished. He looked physically ill. His skin had a gray, clammy undertone, and dark circles bruised the delicate skin under his eyes. His custom-tailored suit looked slightly rumpled as if he had slept in it. He was sweating despite the heavy air conditioning in the cafe. The reality of his frozen corporate assets and the looming audit from my firm was clearly tearing him apart from the inside out. "Michelle, thank goodness you came," my mother said. Her voice was artificially sweet, dripping with a forced maternal warmth that made my skin crawl. She gestured for me to sit in the empty chair across from them. "We have been so worried about you since you stormed out on Sunday." "I did not storm out, Mom," I corrected smoothly. I took my seat and placed my coffee on the table. "I simply refuse to be stolen from. There is a distinct difference." Linda swallowed hard but maintained her manufactured smile. She was desperately trying to pivot away from her previous aggression. "We are all under a tremendous amount of pressure right now, Michelle. That is why I called this emergency meeting. We need to act like a family. We need to support each other." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my flat white. I let the silence stretch out, forcing her to fill the void. "Support each other or support Ashley's vacation?" I asked mildly. Ashley let out a sharp, bitter scoff. She uncrossed her arms and leaned forward to glare at me. "This is exactly what I mean. You are always so defensive and selfish. A real sister would not sit there and let her family suffer. A real sister would step up and do the right thing without being begged." "Suffer," I repeated. The word tasted absurd on my tongue. "You are missing a luxury beach vacation, Ashley. You are not facing a famine." Linda reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. I smoothly pulled my hand away and wrapped it around my warm coffee cup. Linda's smile faltered, but she pushed forward with her new script. She was leaning heavily into the guilt trip. "Michelle, you need to understand the big picture here," Linda pleaded softly. "Kevin is in the middle of closing a massive international contract for his firm. It is the biggest deal of his entire career. The pressure on him is absolute torture. He has been working around the clock, and it is taking a severe toll on his physical health. The doctor said his blood pressure is dangerously high." I glanced at Kevin. He refused to meet my eyes. He stared intensely at a sugar packet on the table, his jaw working furiously. He was a cornered animal, and he knew it. "This Hawaii trip is not just a vacation," Michelle Linda continued, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. "It is a medical necessity. Kevin needs this break to decompress before he finalizes the corporate merger next week. But because of this international contract, his corporate accounts are temporarily tied up in escrow. It is just a standard bureaucratic delay. The travel agency is threatening to cancel the entire package by Friday if the final $6,000 deposit is not cleared." The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Escrow, bureaucratic delay. They were spinning a masterful fairy tale to cover up the fact that Kevin's employer had frozen his credit cards due to suspected massive embezzlement. They were using his fake corporate success to justify stealing my actual money. "So you want me to pay for it," I stated plainly. Linda's eyes widened with practiced innocence. "No, of course not, darling. We just need a bridge loan. Just a temporary authorization on your Chase Sapphire card to hold the reservations. Kevin will reimburse you the very second his international commission clears next week. We will even pay you interest. It is a simple family favor to save your brother-in-law from a stress-induced heart attack." Ashley crossed her arms again and rolled her eyes toward the ceiling. "It is literally $6,000, Michelle. Do not act like it is going to bankrupt you. You live in a tiny house and you never go anywhere. You just sit on your savings while the rest of us actually live our lives. You owe us for putting up with your constant negativity. Unfreeze the card and let Kevin handle the logistics." I sat back in my chair. The bustling noise of the coffee shop faded into a low hum. I looked at the three people sitting across from me. They were a perfect portrait of toxic entitlement. They had spent my entire life breaking me down, ensuring I felt small and insignificant so they could stand tall. They genuinely believed I was too weak and too desperate for their love to ever see through their lies. They thought I was a naive desk clerk who would eagerly hand over my credit card to buy their approval. They had no idea that I was the chief executive officer of the very firm currently dismantling Kevin's fraudulent empire. They had no idea that the massive international contract Kevin was supposedly closing was actually a Tier 1 forensic audit conducted by my team. I placed my coffee cup carefully on its saucer. The ceramic clinked softly against the wood table. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. I let a cold, calculated expression settle over my features. "A bridge loan," I said. The words hung in the air, crisp and sharp. "Yes, exactly," Linda said eagerly. Her shoulders dropped slightly clearly, believing she had won the negotiation. "Just a temporary hold until his corporate funds are released. It will save the whole trip." I shifted my gaze away from my mother. I bypassed my sister entirely. I locked my eyes directly onto Kevin. He finally looked up, and the sheer terror in his gaze was unmistakable. He was looking at me, but he was seeing a ghost. He was seeing the end of his life. I took another slow sip of my coffee, never breaking eye contact with him. "Tell me, Kevin," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. "I am just incredibly curious about the mechanics of high-level global finance. Why exactly is a top-tier senior executive who supposedly manages million-dollar international accounts suddenly begging his sad desk jockey sister-in-law for a $6,000 bridge loan?" Kevin's breath hitched. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure. Linda frowned, clearly confused by the shift in my tone. "Michelle, what kind of question is that? We just explained it to you. His accounts are in escrow for the merger." "Are they?" I asked, maintaining my stare on Kevin. "Are they in escrow, Kevin? Or are they frozen by the compliance division?" Ashley leaned forward, her face twisting in confusion and anger. "What are you talking about, Michelle? Compliance division? You do not know anything about corporate logistics. Stop trying to sound smart and just unfreeze the damn card." I ignored her completely. My entire focus was locked on the sweating, terrified man sitting across from me. He knew. In that exact moment, looking into my eyes, he knew that I knew everything. The facade was cracking, and the light of truth was pouring in. "It is just fascinating to me, Kevin," I continued softly, "because usually when an executive of your caliber has their corporate accounts frozen, it is not because of a pending merger. It is usually because a forensic auditing firm has flagged extensive Tier 1 irregularities. It is usually because someone has been submitting fictitious vendor invoices and expensing luxury vacations to dummy corporations." Kevin's hands began to shake visibly. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Linda and Ashley stared at me in stunned silence, their brains struggling to process the words I was saying. The trap they had carefully laid for me had just snapped shut around their own ankles. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, mirroring the exact posture he had used to intimidate me at Sunday dinner. I held the absolute detonator to his career and their fake perfect life. And I was the one who was going to decide exactly when to press the button. The silence that followed my question was absolute. The ambient noise of the upscale coffee shop, the grinding of espresso beans, the soft jazz music, the chatter of other patrons seemed to evaporate entirely. Kevin stared at me. His mouth opened and closed, but his vocal cords refused to produce a single sound. The arrogant swagger he carried like a shield had completely disintegrated, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell of a man. Ashley was the first to break the stillness. She let out a sharp, abrasive laugh that cut through the tension like a physical blade. She slammed her hand down on the table, rattling the porcelain saucers. "You are unbelievable, Michelle," Ashley sneered, her face twisting into a mask of pure condescension. "You sit there in your cheap blazer pretending you understand anything about how the real world works. You are a miserable cheap failure. You know absolutely nothing about high-level business. You push papers across a desk all day and go home to an empty house." Kevin manages global accounts. He deals with complex international finance that your tiny brain could never even begin to comprehend. Ashley leaned across the table, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of me and my marriage. You cannot stand that my husband is a top-tier executive while your husband ran away because you are so insufferable. You are trying to use this temporary cash flow issue to make yourself feel important. It is pathetic." I did not blink. I did not flinch. I let her vitriol wash over me like water off a stone. Her insults lacked any real sting because they were entirely rooted in a fiction that I was actively dismantling. I slowly turned my gaze away from her flushed, angry face and locked eyes with Kevin again. He was breathing shallowly. The sweat on his forehead had beaded into visible drops. He looked like a man standing on the gallows waiting for the lever to be pulled. High-level business, I said softly, repeating Ashley's words but directing them entirely at him. Complex international finance. That is a fascinating way to describe your current situation, Kevin. But if your financial acumen is so highly developed, I have to ask a rather simple question. I leaned forward slightly, resting my arms on the table. Why exactly have your corporate expense cards been frozen for 3 weeks? The reaction was instantaneous and violent. Kevin's hand jerked upward in a spasm of pure panic. His fingers collided with his heavy ceramic coffee mug. The cup tipped over and crashed off the edge of the table. It hit the hardwood floor with a deafening shatter. Hot, dark coffee splashed across the pristine tiles and splattered onto the cuffs of his expensive trousers. Several people at nearby tables turned to look at the commotion. A barista behind the counter immediately grabbed a towel and started rushing over, but I held up a hand signaling her to wait. I was not finished. Kevin did not even look down at the mess. He stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes. The gray pallor of his skin had turned a sickening shade of white. He looked as though he might physically vomit right there in the booth. "Kevin, what on earth is wrong with you?" Linda scolded. She pulled her designer handbag onto her lap to protect it from the spreading puddle of coffee. She looked at me with deep annoyance. "Michelle, stop talking nonsense and upsetting him. He is under enough stress without you making up ridiculous stories about his expense accounts." I ignored my mother completely. My focus remained surgically locked on Kevin. The fear radiating from him was palpable. "It is not a story, Kevin, is it?" I continued, my voice calm and conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "It is a very real problem. When compliance divisions enact a hard freeze on an executive profile, it is rarely a bureaucratic error. It usually involves a forensic reconciliation of Tier 1 policy violations." I watched him swallow hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. "It usually means they are looking at unauthorized offshore routing," I said, dropping the terminology like heavy stones onto the table. "It means they are tracking sustained discrepancies between revenue reports and client entertainment claims. It means they are pulling the digital paper trail on specific vendors." Kevin gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. He was trying to push himself backward into the booth, trying to put physical distance between himself and the truth I was speaking. "Vendors like Summit Vanguard Enterprises." I stated clearly, enunciating every single syllable of the fake shell company he had used to funnel his stolen money. "I believe that is the vendor you utilized for that massive corporate retreat in Aspen last December. The one you expensed right down to the premium ski rentals and the private catering." A sharp intake of breath hissed through Kevin's teeth. The sound was ragged and desperate. He knew that name. He knew that no one outside of his fraudulent inner circle and his company's restricted accounting server should know that name. He knew I had seen the files. He knew it was over. Ashley let out a loud, exasperated groan, completely oblivious to the absolute terror consuming her husband. She grabbed a handful of napkins from the center dispenser and threw them down onto the spilled coffee with a dramatic flourish. "Can you stop speaking absolute gibberish, Michelle?" she snapped. "Forensic whatever. Offshore routing. You sound like you are reading a script from a bad television show. Nobody cares about your stupid accounting terms. You are deliberately trying to confuse the issue because you are too cheap to help your own family." Ashley glared at me, her eyes blazing with furious entitlement. "We do not care about Summit Vanguard, or whatever boring corporate vendor Kevin uses for his retreats. We care about Hawaii. We care about the $6,000 you owe us for putting up with your constant drama. Stop trying to sound like some corporate mastermind and just transfer the funds right now. The travel agent needs the wire confirmation in an hour." I looked at my sister. The sheer magnitude of her willful ignorance was almost impressive. She was wearing a stolen lifestyle like a second skin, and she refused to look beneath the surface. She only cared about her ocean view suite and her luxury vacation. She could not read the room. She could not read the terrified body language of the man sitting right beside her. Kevin suddenly lurched upward. His knee slammed hard against the underside of the table, rattling the remaining cups and saucers. He grabbed Ashley's arm with a desperate, frantic grip. His fingers dug deeply into the fabric of her sleeve. "We have to go," he choked out. His voice was hoarse and shaking. The polished executive tone was completely gone, replaced by the frantic rasp of a cornered fugitive. "We are leaving, right now." Ashley wrenched her arm away, looking at him with utter shock and rising anger. "What are you doing, Kevin? Let go of me. We are not leaving until she transfers the money. The deposit is due today. We are not losing our vacation because she is being a stubborn witch." "I said we are leaving," Kevin repeated. He stood up, completely ignoring the coffee soaking into his shoes. He did not look at me. He could not look at me. He was staring at the exit door, his breathing shallow and rapid. He looked ready to sprint out of the coffee shop and keep running until he hit the state line. "We are done here. Get your bag, Ashley. We are going home." Linda slammed both of her hands flat onto the table. The sharp crack echoed in our corner of the cafe, silencing Kevin's frantic demands. She stood up slowly, drawing herself to her full height. She was absolutely furious. She believed she was losing control of the situation, and Linda never allowed anyone else to control the narrative. She glared at Kevin with icy disapproval before turning her full wrath toward me. She completely misread his panic, attributing it entirely to the medical stress she had fabricated earlier. "Sit down, Kevin," Linda commanded, her voice cracking like a whip. "You are not going anywhere, and you, Michelle, have crossed a massive line today. I brought you here to ask for a simple family favor. I brought you here to show you grace and give you a chance to redeem yourself after your selfish behavior on Sunday. Instead, you sit here spewing absolute nonsense and deliberately pushing your brother-in-law toward a nervous breakdown." Linda leaned across the table. Her face was inches from mine. Her eyes were dark and ruthless. The mask of the diplomatic, enabling mother had completely fallen away, leaving the cold, calculating matriarch in full view. "You are going to take your phone out right now," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh, unyielding whisper. "You are going to log into your banking application, and you are going to wire $6,000 directly into my account. You are going to do it this very second. You will apologize to Kevin for your disgraceful behavior, and you will apologize to your sister for trying to ruin her happiness." I held her gaze, my expression entirely neutral. "And if I do not?" I asked softly. Linda straightened her posture, squaring her shoulders. She looked down at me with absolute finality. "If you do not transfer that money by the time I finish my tea, you are permanently dead to this family," she stated. "You will be completely cut off. You will never step foot in my house again. You will never see your sister again. We will erase your name from our lives. You will be nothing but a divorced, pathetic woman with no family and no future. I am giving you one last chance to save yourself, Michelle. Do not test me." The silence that followed my mother's threat was thick and heavy, pressing down on our small corner of the coffee shop like a physical weight. For 34 years, those exact words had been the ultimate weapon in Linda's arsenal. She had wielded the threat of excommunication like a blunt instrument, using it to enforce compliance, demand financial sacrifices, and ensure I always knew my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. In the past, the mere suggestion of being cut off would have triggered a severe panic attack. I would have scrambled to apologize, desperate to regain her conditional manufactured affection. I looked at her perfectly manicured hand, still resting flat on the table, trembling slightly with righteous indignation. I looked at Ashley, who was nodding along with our mother, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. And then I looked at Kevin, who looked like a man watching a train bear down on him while his feet were stuck to the tracks. "Do you understand what I am saying to you?" Linda demanded, her voice rising just enough to turn the heads of the patrons at the adjacent table. "If I do not see a confirmation of that $6,000 wire transfer in Kevin's account by midnight tonight, you are completely done. You will not be invited to Thanksgiving. You will not be welcome at Christmas. You will lose the only safety net you have ever known." Ashley leaned in, eager to twist the knife. "And do not think you can just crawl back when your little freelance gigs dry up and you cannot feed your kids." If you do this, my niece and nephew are cut off too. They will never see their cousins again. They will never see their grandmother again. You will be entirely responsible for destroying their family because you were too bitter to help us out. The sheer toxicity of involving my children was the final definitive validation I needed. They were not just willing to extort me, they were willing to weaponize my children's relationships to get what they wanted. Think about your children, Michelle. Linda added her voice, adopting a sickeningly sweet tone of faux concern. Think about how devastated they will be when they realize their mother was too selfish to keep the family together. All over a simple temporary bridge loan. You are making a catastrophic mistake. I took a slow, deep breath, pulling the rich aroma of roasted coffee and warm pastries into my lungs. I expected to feel anger. I expected to feel the familiar, suffocating grip of guilt that had dictated my entire adult life. Instead, a profound, crystal-clear wave of absolute liberation washed over me. The invisible chains my mother had kept wrapped tightly around my neck simply snapped, turning to dust. Her ultimate threat was not a punishment at all. It was the most glorious, desperately needed gift she could have ever offered. I pushed my chair back and stood up smoothly. I did not rush. I maintained perfect, deliberate composure, looking down at the three of them trapped in the leather booth. The physical elevation mirrored the shift in power. "Are you walking away?" Ashley scoffed, her voice shrill and grating. "You are seriously just going to walk out on your family? You are a coward, Michelle." I did not answer her. Instead, I reached into the interior pocket of my tailored navy blazer and pulled out my sleek, minimalist leather wallet. I flipped it open. I did not carry a standard debit card. I did not carry a basic credit card with a $5,000 limit. I reached in and pulled out a solid, heavy metal card. It was the American Express Centurion card, the infamous black card. It was forged from anodized titanium, completely black with minimalist lettering, and it required a massive multi-million-dollar annual spend just to maintain the account. It was the ultimate, undeniable symbol of vast, limitless wealth. I held it casually between my index and middle finger. I turned toward the barista counter, catching the eye of the young woman who had been hovering nearby since Kevin's coffee spill. "Excuse me," I called out softly, my voice calm and perfectly steady. "I need to pay for my flat white, please." I tossed the heavy titanium card onto the wooden table right in front of my mother. The card did not just slide across the surface. It landed with a dense, unmistakable thud that only solid metal makes. The sound was sharp and heavy, cutting through the ambient noise of the cafe. Linda looked down at the card, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. She blinked, her brain struggling to reconcile the object on the table with the daughter she thought she knew. She recognized the American Express logo, but the heavy black metal surface was entirely foreign to her. She belonged to a world of upper-middle-class aspiration, a world of premium airline miles and platinum status. She did not belong to the world of limitless, untethered wealth. She had no idea what she was looking at. Ashley leaned over, squinting at the card. "What is that?" she muttered, her smug smile finally slipping. "Why is your credit card made of metal? Is that some cheap prepaid thing?" But Kevin knew. Kevin lived and breathed corporate status. He spent his entire life studying the habits, accessories, and financial markers of the ultra-wealthy executives he desperately wanted to emulate. I watched his eyes lock onto the black titanium. His pupils dilated so wide they almost swallowed his irises. The last remaining drops of color vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. His jaw went completely slack. He knew exactly what the Centurion card was. He knew that you could not apply for one. He knew you had to be invited, and that an invitation required a personal net worth and an annual expenditure that eclipsed his entire regional division's operating budget. He knew that the initiation fee alone cost more than the Hawaiian vacation Ashley was currently demanding I pay for. "Michelle," Kevin whispered. His voice was broken, barely a rasp of air pushing past his vocal cords. He slowly lifted his eyes from the card to my face. The absolute terror in his gaze had evolved into a state of catatonic shock. He was finally seeing the truth. He was not looking at a struggling divorced single mother. He was looking at a titan. The pieces were finally connecting in his panicked brain. The casual mention of compliance divisions, the exact naming of his fake offshore vendor Summit Vanguard, the fact that his corporate expense accounts had been frozen by Apex Global Logistics and Concierge just 3 days ago. He looked at my tailored suit, the heavy titanium card, and the absolute cold authority in my eyes, and he realized he was staring at the executioner. "Kevin, what is it?" Ashley demanded, her voice sharp with sudden, unexplainable panic. She grabbed his arm and shook it, but he did not respond. He could not look away from me. "What kind of card is that?" Linda asked, her voice faltering for the first time in 34 years. She looked from the heavy metal card to Kevin's paralyzed face, and the first seeds of genuine fear began to take root in her eyes. The reality she had constructed was fracturing, and she had no idea how to stop it. I reached down and picked up the card, the cool metal feeling perfectly natural in my hand. I handed it to the approaching barista, who quickly processed the $4 charge and handed it back with a polite nod. I slipped the card back into my wallet and returned it to my blazer pocket. I looked at my mother. I looked dead into her dark, calculating eyes, stripping away decades of submission and fear. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power does not shout. Midnight. I said, my voice smooth and chillingly calm. Linda blinked, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "What? You said if the money was not in his account by midnight, I am permanently erased from this family. No holidays, no contact, total separation." I smiled, and the expression felt predatory and absolute. "That is the best offer you have ever given me, Mother. I accept your terms." I did not wait for a response. I did not stay to watch Ashley's confusion mutate into rage, or to watch Linda attempt to salvage her shattered authority. I simply turned my back on them and walked toward the glass doors. My posture was flawless. My steps were measured and confident. I left them sitting in the wreckage of their own arrogant trap, completely paralyzed by the sudden, terrifying shift in the universe. I pushed through the doors and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The sunlight felt brilliant and warm against my skin. I took a deep breath, inhaling the absolute scent of freedom. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my encrypted corporate smartphone. I bypassed the barrage of incoming notifications from my personal life and opened my secure executive email client. I drafted a single direct message to Marcus and the Apex Global legal team. I did not hesitate. I did not feel an ounce of pity for the man sweating in the coffee shop behind me or for the sister who had funded her vanity with stolen money. My family had demanded consequences, and I was finally going to deliver them. I typed out the subject line with rapid, precise keystrokes. "Approve the audit report. Initiate immediate termination protocols for Kevin's division." I hit send. The Friday morning air was crisp and completely clear as the sleek black town car pulled to a gentle stop outside the private VIP entrance of the international terminal. There were no chaotic crowds, no blaring overhead announcements, and absolutely no frantic scrambling for passports. A uniformed attendant opened the door before the engine even cut off, greeting us by name with a warm, professional smile. He seamlessly extracted our luggage from the trunk, assuring me that we would not have to touch a single bag until they were delivered directly to our oceanfront villa in Fiji. Within minutes, we were escorted through a private expedited security screening and guided through a set of frosted glass doors into the ultra-exclusive first-class lounge. The space was a masterpiece of modern architectural design. Floor-to-ceiling soundproof windows offered an uninterrupted panoramic view of the active runway. The lighting was soft and warm, complementing the rich mahogany paneling and the plush, deep-seated leather furniture that dotted the expansive room. A quiet, soothing jazz melody drifted from invisible speakers, mingling with the muted clinking of crystal and silver. I sank into a luxurious armchair near the glass, feeling the tension that had lived in my shoulders for 3 decades physically melt away. Caleb and Lily sat across from me at a low marble table, their eyes wide with unadulterated wonder. A personal lounge attendant had just delivered their breakfast on silver trays. They were currently devouring thick Belgian waffles topped with fresh organic strawberries, imported vanilla bean syrup, and dustings of powdered sugar. A crystal pitcher of freshly squeezed orange juice sat between them, glowing brightly in the early morning light. I took a slow, deep breath and lifted my custom-ordered espresso to my lips. The coffee was rich dark and perfectly brewed. As I watched the golden hues of the sunrise bleed across the horizon and reflect off the silver wings of the massive commercial jets, outside a profound, unshakable serenity washed over my entire body. The atmosphere in our private suite was joyful light and completely free of the toxic, suffocating anxiety that had poisoned every single family holiday I had ever endured. For my entire adult life, family vacations were nothing more than elaborate exercises in psychological endurance. I was never a guest. I was an unpaid logistical servant. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, allowing the ghosts of previous trips to surface just long enough for me to appreciate their permanent absence. I remembered the disastrous family trip to Cabo San Lucas 5 years ago. My mother had demanded I handle all the booking arrangements, weaponizing her conditional affection to ensure I secured the exact oceanfront condo she wanted. When we arrived at the airport, Ashley had shoved two of her massive, overpacked suitcases toward me, complaining that her shoulders ached. Kevin had walked 10 paces ahead of us, aggressively tapping on his phone and loudly complaining about the inefficiency of commercial travel. I had dragged 80 pounds of luggage through the sweltering terminal, sweating through my clothes while my mother chastised me for walking too slowly. When we finally reached the luxury rental, Linda had immediately claimed the master suite for herself. She assigned the second premium bedroom to Ashley and Kevin, citing Kevin's need for a proper mattress due to his high-level executive stress. I was directed to the lumpy, broken pull-out sofa in the living room. Throughout that entire week in Mexico, my primary function was to serve. I woke up at dawn to brew the coffee. I ran to the local markets to purchase the specific brands of sparkling water Ashley demanded. I organized the rental cars, managed the dinner reservations, and silently absorbed the blame whenever the weather turned cloudy or the restaurant seating was delayed. On the final night, Kevin had proudly ordered 3 bottles of vintage champagne at dinner, boasting to the waiter about his latest corporate acquisition. When the bill arrived, my mother had slid the leather folio across the table toward me, stating that since they had been generous enough to allow me to tag along, covering the final dinner was the absolute least I could do. I had drained my meager savings account that night just to buy their temporary silence. I opened my eyes and looked at my children. Lily was giggling, pointing a sticky fork at a massive jet accelerating down the tarmac. Caleb was reading aloud from a glossy brochure about the vibrant coral reefs we would be exploring by tomorrow afternoon. They were radiant. They were not walking on eggshells. They were not whispering in the corners, terrified of triggering one of their grandmother's explosive tantrums. They were simply allowed to exist as happy, cherished children. A tall, impeccably dressed man approached our seating area. He was the head concierge for the VIP suite assigned exclusively to our family for the duration of our stay in the lounge. He stopped at a respectful distance, offering a polite, deferential bow. "Good morning, Ms. Wilson," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "I wanted to personally confirm that your luggage has been securely loaded into the priority hold of your aircraft. The captain has informed us that the flight path is perfectly clear, and we anticipate a remarkably smooth journey over the Pacific. We will be boarding you privately in approximately 45 minutes, well before the main cabin is opened." "Thank you, Julian," I replied, offering him a genuine smile. "Everything is absolutely perfect." "It is our pleasure," he said. He turned his attention to Caleb and Lily, holding out a small, velvet-lined tray. "I was informed by our staff that we have 2 aspiring marine biologists traveling with us today. The airline would like to present you both with these complimentary underwater exploration kits for your adventures in Fiji." Caleb's jaw dropped as he carefully took a high-end waterproof camera from the tray. Lily gasped in delight, clutching a beautifully illustrated encyclopedia of South Pacific marine life. They eagerly thanked Julian, their voices bubbling with genuine gratitude and excitement. If you require anything else, a fresh espresso, an adjustment to the ambient temperature, or perhaps a different selection of pastries, please simply press the service button on your table, Julian said, offering one final nod, before silently gliding away to give us our privacy. I leaned back into the plush leather, savoring the absolute luxury of being completely cared for. I did not have to check boarding zones. I did not have to guard the luggage. I did not have to endure my mother's sharp, biting criticisms about my wardrobe or my parenting. I was completely unburdened. My personal cell phone was currently powered down and buried at the very bottom of my carry-on tote. I had turned it off the moment I walked out of the coffee shop on Tuesday morning. I knew exactly what kind of digital warfare my family would be attempting to wage. I knew Linda would be flooding my voicemail with furious ultimatums, demanding the $6,000 bridge loan, screaming that the midnight deadline was approaching. I knew Ashley would be sending hundreds of unhinged text messages calling me a monster for jeopardizing her perfect island getaway. I knew Kevin would be silently spiraling into a pit of absolute despair. I did not care. Their frantic, desperate voices no longer held any power over my psychological state. They had demanded I wire them money under the threat of permanent disownment. They had set the terms of engagement, and I had simply accepted them. They were erased. The heavy, suffocating anchor of their toxic presence had been permanently severed from my life. I was free. As I took another sip of my coffee, a sharp, distinctive vibration broke the quiet tranquility of my immediate space. The sound did not come from my buried personal device. It came from the sleek, encrypted corporate smartphone resting face down on the marble table next to my espresso cup. It was a dedicated, unlisted line that bypassed all standard communication protocols. Only 3 people in the world had the clearance to initiate a call on that specific channel. I set my ceramic cup down on its saucer. The quiet clink seemed to echo loudly in my own ears. I picked up the heavy black device and swiped my thumb across the biometric scanner. The screen unlocked, displaying a highly secured incoming call from Marcus, my lead corporate auditor and the head of the Apex Global Forensic Division. I pressed the phone to my ear. Michelle speaking? Good morning, Chief, Marcus said. His voice was completely devoid of its usual casual warmth. He was operating in strict tactical execution mode. I am calling to confirm that the directive you issued on Tuesday morning has been fully executed. The operation is currently active. I kept my eyes fixed on the runway outside, watching a plane lift off the tarmac and ascend into the bright morning sky. Give me the precise timeline, Marcus. The comprehensive audit report, complete with all digital tracking, forged vendor invoices, and offshore routing pathways, was transmitted directly to the Chief Financial Officer and the Board of Directors at Kevin's firm at exactly 6 o'clock this morning, Marcus reported with clinical precision. They convened an emergency board meeting at 6:30. The evidence was irrefutable. They bypassed internal review and immediately contacted federal authorities. I felt a cold, sharp thrill of absolute justice cascade down my spine. And Kevin? I asked softly. Intercepted, Marcus confirmed. At exactly 7:45 this morning, Kevin attempted to scan his executive badge at the primary security turnstile of his corporate headquarters. The badge was automatically confiscated by the system. He was immediately surrounded by 4 members of internal corporate security. He was not permitted to enter the elevator bank. He was not permitted to access his division floor or retrieve any personal items from his desk. Where is he now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper over the soft jazz playing in the lounge. He was escorted directly to a holding room on the ground floor. Marcus stated, the satisfaction practically bleeding through the encrypted line. His company issued immediate termination protocols. His corporate phone was wiped remotely. His accounts are permanently frozen. The federal authorities arrived on site 10 minutes ago. They are currently in the holding room with him now, formally presenting the evidence of Tier 1 embezzlement and corporate fraud. He is being taken into custody, Michelle. The bomb has officially dropped. Across the city, entirely removed from the serene luxury of the private aviation sector Terminal C of the Metropolitan Airport, was a portrait of pure, unadulterated chaos. The air conditioning was failing, the heavy scent of stale pretzels and floor wax hung thick in the air, and the harsh fluorescent lights cast a sickly green hue over the massive throng of exhausted travelers. Linda, Ashley, and Kevin stood rigidly in the center of the budget airline terminal, sticking out like sore thumbs. They were surrounded by 5 oversized, pristine designer luggage trunks that completely blocked the walkway. Ashley was aggressively tapping her stiletto against the scuffed linoleum floor, glaring at the families in sweatpants pushing past her. She wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and a silk resort cover-up, fully dressed for a tropical arrival that was rapidly slipping through her fingers. They finally reached the front of the sprawling, chaotic check-in line. The airline agent, a tired woman wearing a frayed blue lanyard, did not look up from her monitor as she asked for their confirmation codes. Kevin stepped forward with a heavy sigh, slapping a printed itinerary onto the counter as if he were granting the woman an audience with royalty. He carried himself with the stiff, brittle arrogance of a man desperately trying to outrun a collapsing reality. The agent typed the sequence into her keyboard. She paused, frowned, and typed it again. She reached out and took Ashley's passport, scanning the barcode. The machine let out a sharp, negative beep. "I am sorry, sir," the agent said, her voice carrying the flat, mechanical tone of someone who delivered bad news for a living. "Your entire reservation has been officially voided by the booking agency. There are no tickets under this name, and your corresponding resort manifest was canceled at exactly 1 minute past midnight." Ashley let out a sharp, high-pitched gasp. She slapped her hands down on the plastic counter, leaning over to glare at the computer monitor she could not even read. "That is absolutely impossible," she shrieked, drawing the immediate attention of the 50 people waiting in line behind them. "We have a premium ocean view package. We are flying out today. You need to refresh your system right now and find our tickets." The agent did not flinch. She simply turned the monitor slightly so the glaring red text was visible. "The primary deposit authorization failed to clear the final hold," she explained calmly. "The travel agency voided the promotional package due to non-payment. You have no flight. You have no resort. I need you to step aside so I can assist the next passenger." Linda pushed past Kevin, her face flushing a deep mottled red. She was practically vibrating with fury. Michelle had actually done it. The ungrateful, spiteful scapegoat of the family had actually let the midnight deadline pass without transferring the funds. Linda pointed a sharp, perfectly manicured finger at the airline agent. "You listen to me," Linda commanded, employing the exact tone she used to terrorize retail workers and restaurant managers. "There has been a massive banking error on the part of our financial institution. We are highly respected members of this community. You are going to reinstate those tickets immediately, and you are going to upgrade us for the sheer inconvenience of this ridiculous system failure." The agent blinked, completely unmoved by the aggressive display of suburban entitlement. "I cannot reinstate a voided third-party package, ma'am. If you want to fly to Honolulu today, you will need to purchase 3 new one-way tickets at the current walk-up rate. That will be $2,400 per passenger." Ashley let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She grabbed Kevin by the arm, her carefully curated vacation aesthetic entirely forgotten. "Fix this!" "Kevin," she demanded, her voice shrill and echoing off the low ceiling, "pull out your corporate card and just buy the tickets. I do not care what it costs. We are not turning around and going home. My entire social media feed knows I'm going to Hawaii today. Fix it right now." Kevin stood frozen. His pristine corporate facade was fracturing by the second. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He knew his corporate cards were useless. He knew the audit had likely locked him out of his own life. But standing there with his furious wife demanding action and his mother-in-law glaring at him with pure expectation, the pressure simply broke him. He could not admit that he was entirely bankrupt. He could not admit that his entire career was a fraudulent house of cards. The lie was the only thing holding him together. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his heavy metal corporate expense card. He threw it onto the counter with a manufactured scoff, playing the role of the annoyed, infinitely wealthy executive to the bitter end. "Just run the card," Kevin said, forcing a condescending smirk onto his pale, sweating face. "Put us on the next flight out and charge the premium rate. Send the receipt to my corporate accounting division. I do not have time to argue with budget airline workers." The agent picked up the heavy card. She did not say a word. She simply swiped the magnetic strip through the reader attached to her keyboard. The machine processed for 3 excruciating seconds. Then a loud, jarring error tone blared from the small speaker. The screen flashed violently. Kevin's stomach plummeted into his shoes. He opened his mouth to blame the terminal, to claim the magnetic strip was worn, to deploy any excuse he could manufacture to buy himself another hour of oxygen. But the agent did not hand the card back. She stared at her monitor, her eyes widening slightly. She quickly hit a button under the counter. "Run it again!" Kevin snapped, his voice cracking with rising panic. "Your machine is clearly broken. Hand me the card, I will insert the chip myself." The agent stepped back from the counter, holding the heavy metal card firmly in her hand. "I cannot do that, sir," she said, her tone suddenly devoid of customer service politeness. Before Kevin could demand an explanation, the heavy double doors adjacent to the security checkpoint swung open. 2 uniformed airport police officers, accompanied by a seasoned TSA supervisor, walked briskly toward the check-in counter. They moved with absolute targeted purpose. The massive line of tired, frustrated economy travelers immediately parted, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The officers approached the counter, and the agent silently handed the corporate card directly to the supervisor. The supervisor inspected the name on the metal, looked up, and locked eyes with Kevin. "Are you Kevin Bradley?" the supervisor asked, his voice booming over the terminal noise. Kevin swallowed hard. He felt the blood rushing in his ears. "Yes," he managed to croak out. The supervisor held up the card. "This financial instrument has been flagged by the issuing institution as stolen and actively involved in felony corporate fraud," he stated loudly. "The issuing bank has issued a hard confiscation order. We have been instructed to retain this card and verify your identity. I need you to step away from the counter and present your state identification immediately." A heavy, suffocated silence fell over the immediate area. The travelers waiting in line behind them suddenly pulled out their smartphones. The harsh glare of camera lenses and recording lights illuminated the scene. Kevin Bradley, the man who demanded respect and commanded boardrooms, was being publicly detained like a common thief in the middle of a budget terminal. Ashley stared at the security officers, her jaw hanging slack. The sheer public humiliation of the moment was completely short-circuiting her brain. She looked at the flashing cell phones surrounding them, realizing that her pristine, carefully curated image was currently being broadcast to hundreds of strangers. The reality snapped her fragile sanity entirely in half. Ashley lunged toward the counter, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. "This is a mistake," she screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Do you have any idea who he is? Do you know who we are? We are wealthy. We are going to Hawaii. You are all just jealous, pathetic, miserable people trying to ruin my vacation because you are stuck working in this disgusting airport. Ma'am, step back right now," one of the police officers ordered, placing a firm hand on his utility belt. "If you continue to create a public disturbance, you will be physically removed from the premises and cited for disorderly conduct." Ashley did not care. She slammed her fists wildly against the plastic counter, knocking over a display of luggage tags. She shrieked that they were going to sue the airline, sue the airport, and buy the entire building just to fire everyone working there. Linda watched her golden child completely self-destruct. The matriarch, who had spent decades meticulously managing their public image, realized the situation was entirely beyond her control. She abandoned the check-in counter entirely. She grabbed the handle of her heavy suitcase and dragged it toward a concrete pillar near the restrooms, trying to escape the glare of the recording cell phones. Linda pulled out her phone with trembling hands and frantically dialed her private banking concierge. The line rang endlessly before dropping her into an automated holding queue. She stood against the cold pillar, tapping her foot desperately, trying to secure an emergency line of credit, a rapid equity loan against her house, anything to generate the cash needed to buy their way out of this nightmare. She was ready to mortgage her entire future just to stop the public bleeding. Back at the counter, Kevin was backed against the luggage scale, completely paralyzed. He handed his driver's license to the security officer with shaking, clammy hands. He watched his wife screaming at the authorities, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire life was already over. He knew exactly what the confiscated card meant. The auditing firm had found the offshore routing. The bridge loan was never going to happen. Michelle had played him flawlessly. As the security officer cross-referenced his identification with the fraud alert, Kevin heard a sharp, distinctive vibration from his jacket pocket. It was his personal cell phone. His corporate device had been dead since he woke up. He pulled the phone out with numb fingers. The caller ID displayed the primary corporate switchboard of his logistics firm. His lungs seized. He stared at the glowing screen as if it were a venomous snake. He swiped to answer, raising the phone to his ear with a trembling hand. Kevin Bradley, a voice stated. It was the absolute unyielding voice of the Global Director of Human Resources. Yes, Kevin whispered. Your corporate access has been permanently revoked. The director stated the words, hitting Kevin like physical blows. The Compliance Division has seized your regional office and all corresponding digital assets. You are hereby suspended without pay, pending a federal investigation into Tier 1 embezzlement. You are instructed to report directly to the Corporate Legal Department at headquarters immediately. You must arrive accompanied by independent legal counsel. Do not attempt to contact any vendors or employees. We are waiting for you. The contrasting reality between my current environment and the absolute destruction happening across the city was almost difficult to comprehend. The private VIP lounge remained a sanctuary of insulated quiet. A soft, melodic acoustic guitar track played through invisible speakers, completely masking any mechanical noise from the tarmac outside. The air smelled faintly of fresh eucalyptus and roasted espresso. Across the low marble table, Caleb and Lily had finished their gourmet breakfasts and were happily occupied with the high-end marine biology kits the concierge had gifted them. Lily was meticulously tracing the outline of a sea turtle in her new sketchbook, while Caleb read fascinating facts about the South Pacific reef systems. They were safe, they were relaxed, they were completely untethered from the generational trauma that had dictated my entire existence. I reached down into the depths of my leather carry-on tote and wrapped my fingers around my personal cell phone. I had buried it beneath a stack of travel documents the moment I walked out of the coffee shop, fully anticipating the digital warfare my mother and sister would inevitably launch. When I pulled the device out and pressed the side button to wake the screen, the phone was physically warm to the touch. The battery had already drained by 20%, purely from the sheer unadulterated volume of incoming notifications. The screen was a solid, glowing wall of panic. It began vibrating in my hand the second it connected to the lounge's high-speed wireless network. The notifications stacked on top of each other so rapidly that I could barely read the individual previews before they were pushed down by the next wave of incoming alerts. I sat back in my plush leather armchair, resting my ankle over my knee, and watched the total collapse of my family unfold in real time through a digital footprint. The onslaught was staggering. In the span of a single hour, I had received exactly 33 missed calls. My mother and my sister were alternating their attempts, calling back to back in a desperate, relentless rhythm. Interspersed between the missed call alerts was a flood of frantic, increasingly unhinged text messages. I scrolled to the very beginning of the barrage, tracing their descent into absolute disaster. At 10:12 in the morning, the first message arrived from Ashley. We are at the check-in counter. The agent says our booking is voided because the final deposit did not clear. Transfer the $6,000 right now. This is not funny. At 10:19, a message arrived from my mother. Michelle, stop playing your petty little games. You are ruining your sister's morning. Transfer the funds immediately or there will be severe consequences. By 10:30, the tone shifted from entitled annoyance to genuine alarm. Ashley texted again. Kevin just tried to use his corporate card for walk-up tickets and the machine declined it. It says stolen. What did you do to his account? Pick up the phone right now. At 10:42, the panic reached critical mass. My mother sent a rapid-fire sequence of texts completely abandoning proper grammar and punctuation. Airport police are here. They have Kevin. They are asking for his identification. Michelle, answer your phone. Followed immediately by, they took his corporate card. They are saying it is tied to fraud. What did you say to him at the coffee shop? Fix this right now. At 10:55, Ashley sent her final feral message. Everyone in the terminal is recording us. Kevin is gone. They took him to a back room. I am sitting on the floor with our luggage and people are pointing at me. I am going to destroy you. You are dead to me. I read every single word. I absorbed the venom, the terror, and the desperate attempts to shift the blame onto my shoulders. I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, freezing calm. I reflected briefly on how many family vacations I had spent sprinting through terminals, carrying their heavy luggage, managing the chaotic itineraries, and paying for unexpected extras out of my own meager savings, while they treated me like an unpaid servant. They had conditioned me to believe that my only value was my utility to them. They had expected me to absorb their financial burdens to maintain their illusion of wealth. Now a personal concierge was managing our bags. My children were being treated like royalty, and my abusive family was drowning in the consequences of their own spectacular arrogance. The phone vibrated violently against my palm once again. The screen flashed brightly. Call number 34. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. At that exact moment, Julian, our dedicated concierge, approached the seating area. He moved with quiet efficiency, stopping a respectful distance away. He offered a polite, deferential bow. "Ms. Wilson," Julian said, his voice a soothing contrast to the glowing brick of anxiety in my hand. "Your aircraft is fully prepared, and the captain has cleared us for private boarding. If you and the children are ready, I will escort you directly down the jet bridge. Your luggage has already been secured in your suite." "Thank you, Julian," I replied warmly. "We will be right behind you." Caleb and Lily eagerly packed up their new exploration kits, their faces glowing with excitement. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored trousers. I looked down at the vibrating phone. I knew I did not have to answer it. I owed them absolutely nothing. But I also knew that ignoring the call would leave a tiny fraction of the narrative unfinished. I needed to drive the final nail into the coffin of their entitlement. I needed Linda to hear my voice and understand that the power dynamic had permanently, irreversibly shifted. I swiped the green icon across the screen and lifted the phone to my ear. "Hello, Mom," I said smoothly. The audio quality on the other end of the line was a chaotic assault on the senses. Through the speaker, I could hear the echoing, cavernous roar of the budget airline terminal. I heard the garbled distortion of overhead security announcements, the squeaking wheels of heavy luggage carts, and the frustrated shouts of delayed travelers. Cutting through all of that ambient noise was the sound of my mother's voice. Linda was completely hysterical. The composed, calculating matriarch who had threatened to erase me from the family just hours prior had entirely evaporated. She was screaming over the loud airport noise, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered desperation. "Michelle," Linda shrieked, the sound physically abrasive against my ear. "Where have you been? I have been calling you for an hour. We are in an absolute nightmare. Airport security took Kevin. They literally marched him away into a holding room. They said his corporate card was flagged for felony embezzlement. Ashley is having a complete nervous breakdown on the terminal floor. People are standing around us recording the entire thing on their cell phones. It is a complete disaster." I remained silent, letting her exhaust her frantic oxygen. "This is all your fault," Linda cried out, attempting to weaponize her guilt one final time. "You stressed Kevin out so badly at the coffee shop with your ridiculous accounting threats that he must have made some kind of clerical error with his corporate bank. You manifested this disaster. You have completely ruined your sister's vacation. I did not force Kevin to steal corporate funds to pay for a luxury lifestyle, Mom," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of empathy. I simply asked him a question he could not answer. "Shut up and listen to me," Linda demanded, her panic overriding any semblance of logic. "I need you to wire $15,000 into my checking account right this second. The airline is demanding $2,400 per person for walk-up tickets, and I need the rest for a massive legal retainer to get Kevin out of airport jail. We cannot go home. The humiliation would be unbearable. We have to get on a plane today. You have to fix this." She was entirely detached from reality. Even as her son-in-law was being detained for federal fraud, Her primary concern was securing first-class tickets to Hawaii to escape the social embarrassment of returning to her neighborhood without a tan. "Wire the money right now, Michelle!" Linda screamed, the hysteria bleeding into outright demands. "I know you have it. You showed us that heavy metal card. You have the money. You are destroying your sister's life. Fix this right now, or I swear to God you will never recover from what I do to you." I lowered the phone slightly, looking out through the soundproof glass. Julian was holding open the frosted doors to the private jet bridge. Caleb and Lily were walking ahead of me, their backpacks securely over their shoulders. They were chatting animatedly with a smiling flight attendant who was waiting to guide them into the luxurious first-class cabin. They looked so incredibly happy. They looked free. I raised the phone back to my ear. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her frantic screaming energy. I spoke with a terrifyingly calm, commanding register that carried the absolute weight of finality. "I do have the money, Mom," I said softly, ensuring every single syllable was perfectly clear. "In fact, I have more money than this entire family has ever seen, but I'm not fixing anything." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, stretching for several long, agonizing seconds. I could practically hear the gears in my mother's head grinding to a violent, sparking halt. The concept of me possessing wealth, let alone refusing to surrender it to her upon command, completely defied the rigid, unyielding hierarchy she had spent decades constructing. "What did you just say to me?" Linda finally breathed. Her voice was no longer a frantic shriek. It had dropped into a low, dangerous register, the exact tone she used right before she initiated a campaign of total psychological destruction against whoever had dared to cross her. "Do not play these games with me, Michelle. You do not have that kind of money. You are a divorced, struggling mother who barely makes ends meet. You are lying because you are bitter, and you are trying to punish us." I did not break my stride. I stepped off the carpeted floor of the jet bridge and crossed the threshold into the main cabin of the aircraft. The transition was like stepping into another dimension. The air inside the first-class cabin smelled of fresh citrus, warm vanilla, and expensive leather. A flight attendant, dressed in an immaculate tailored uniform, stood waiting with a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Wilson." The attendant greeted me softly, gesturing toward the expansive private suites that made up the front of the plane. "Your children are already getting settled in suites 1A and 2A. Would you care for a glass of champagne or sparkling water while we complete the boarding process?" "Sparkling water with lime, please," I replied, offering her a nod of profound gratitude. I settled into my spacious, reclining leather seat in Suite 1B. I sank into the plush, ergonomic cushions, feeling the gentle, powerful hum of the aircraft engines vibrating through the floor. I kept the phone pressed firmly to my ear. I had absolutely no intention of hanging up. I wanted them to hear every single word. I wanted to dismantle their false reality piece by meticulous piece. "I am not lying, Mom," I said, my voice projecting a serene, unbreakable confidence that echoed perfectly within the quiet luxury of the cabin. "I am currently sitting in a private first-class suite. In a few minutes, this plane is going to take off, and my children and I are flying to an exclusive oceanfront villa in Fiji. The entire trip was paid for in full, in cash, by the corporate entity that I built from the ground up." The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line was audible even over the deafening terminal noise. "You are delusional," Linda snapped, though the absolute certainty in her voice was visibly beginning to fracture. "Fiji, first class. You push papers across a desk. You work in a tiny, depressing cubicle. You are making this up to torture your sister. You are a sick, twisted individual." "I have never worked in a cubicle, Mom," I corrected her gently. "I allowed you to believe that because it kept you from asking for my money. It kept you from exploiting my success the way you exploit every other relationship in your life." Before Linda could formulate a response, a sudden, violent scuffle erupted through the speaker. I heard the sharp smack of plastic hitting skin, followed by my mother's indignant, offended gasp. "Give me that phone!" Ashley shrieked. The audio feed fumbled and scratched violently against clothing before my sister's voice came through, loud, piercing, and completely unhinged. "You are a liar!" Ashley screamed. Her voice was so shrill, it physically distorted the tiny speaker on my secure device. You are a pathetic, miserable, jealous liar. You are sitting in your tiny, depressing apartment right now, making up fairy tales because you cannot stand the fact that I have a perfect life. You cannot stand that my husband is a top-tier executive while yours ran away from you. Ashley was actively hyperventilating, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate, frantic rush to assert her lifelong dominance. Kevin manages global accounts. Do you hear me? He deals with complex international finance. He makes more money in a single month than you scrape together in an entire year. You are nothing compared to us. You will always be nothing. I sat in my luxurious leather seat, watching a flight attendant present my children with a silver tray of artisanal chocolates and warm, scented towels. I listened to my sister's desperate, screeching tirade broadcasting directly into my ear, and for the first time in 34 years, I did not feel a single ounce of shame. I did not feel the desperate, clawing need to defend myself. I did not feel inferior. I laughed. It was not a mocking chuckle or a bitter, sarcastic scoff. It was a genuine, deep, entirely unbothered laugh. The sound bubbled up from the very center of my chest, completely devoid of malice, fueled only by the sheer magnificent absurdity of her delusions. The sound of my laughter echoed through the phone line and struck Ashley like a physical blow. Her screaming abruptly ceased. The silence that followed on her end was thick with profound, terrifying confusion. In our entire dynamic, I had never laughed at her. I had only ever cowered, apologized, or retreated. "What is so funny?" Ashley demanded. Her voice trembled violently, the absolute certainty of her superiority finally cracking under the immense weight of my amusement. "Why are you laughing at me?" "I am laughing because you are standing in a budget airline terminal, screaming at a plastic counter, fiercely defending a man who has completely destroyed your life," I said, my voice dropping back into a calm, commanding register. "Ashley, I want you to stop yelling. I want you to take the phone away from your face, turn around, and look at your husband." "What are you talking about?" she snapped defensively. "Do it," I commanded, projecting the kind of absolute authority that brooked absolutely no argument. "Turn around and look at Kevin." I heard a slight rustling through the speaker as Ashley physically shifted her posture. I knew exactly what she was looking at. I knew the exact portrait of devastation standing near the baggage drop. "Look at him closely," I instructed, painting the picture for her with surgical precision. "Look at the high-powered top-tier executive. Is he marching up to the counter to demand a resolution from the airline manager? Is he pulling out another heavy black card to fix your itinerary? Is he calling his private wealth manager to secure a private jet to Hawaii?" Ashley did not answer. I could hear her breathing turn shallow and highly erratic over the line. "No." I continued, my words landing with rhythmic, devastating accuracy. "He is standing there completely paralyzed. He is ashen. He is sweating through his expensive shirt. He is actively hyperventilating. He looks exactly like a man who is about to be arrested because that is exactly what is happening to him right now." "You do not know what you are talking about," Ashley whispered, but her voice lacked any real conviction. She was staring at Kevin, and her own eyes were confirming every single terrifying word I said. "Your perfect life is a mirage, Ashley," I stated, completely dismantling the illusion she had worshipped for years. "Every single designer bag in your closet, every luxury car in your driveway, every piece of diamond jewelry you have ever flaunted in my face, every single drop of it was funded by stolen money. Kevin is not a financial genius. He is a common criminal. He has been embezzling massive sums of money from his company for years, funneling it through fake shell companies just to pay for your vanity." I let the crushing weight of that reality settle over the line. I wanted her to feel the foundation of her entire existence crumbling beneath her feet. I wanted her to understand the absolute totality of her ruin. The corporate card he just handed the airline agent was not declined because of a banking error, I explained, delivering the final fatal truth with zero hesitation. It was confiscated because it was flagged for felony corporate fraud. His accounts are permanently frozen. His career is over. The federal authorities are likely walking through the terminal doors right now to detain him. The charade is officially over, Ashley. You are completely undeniably broke. A low guttural sound escaped Ashley's throat. It was the sound of a woman realizing she was standing in the center of a burning building with the exits barred shut. Her brain was violently rejecting the information, trying desperately to cling to the safe, arrogant reality she had known just 20 minutes ago. No! Ashley gasped her breath, hitching wildly as the panic truly set in. No, you are lying. You are making this up. You could not possibly know this. You work at a desk. You are a nobody. She took a ragged, desperate breath, screaming into the receiver with the last remaining shreds of her sanity. How could you possibly know anything about Kevin's finances? Tell me how you know. I smiled, taking a slow, satisfying sip of my sparkling water. The ice clinked gently against the crystal glass. The flight attendant walked past, offering a polite, respectful nod as the heavy cabin doors began to close, sealing us inside our sanctuary of first-class peace. I settled back into my luxurious seat, adjusting the leather headrest as I prepared to deliver the final crushing blow. The heavy soundproof door of my private suite clicked shut, sealing me inside a quiet sanctuary of polished wood and soft leather. Outside the aircraft, the baggage handlers were loading the final pieces of cargo, but inside the only sound was the gentle hum of the climate control system and the frantic, shallow breathing radiating from my cell phone speaker. Ashley was waiting for an answer. She was demanding to know how I, the invisible, useless sister, could possibly possess inside knowledge about her wealthy, untouchable husband. I leaned my head back against the pristine headrest and stared at the curved ceiling of the cabin. Ask your husband why his card was confiscated, Ashley, I instructed, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. Turn to him right now and ask him why the Global Fraud Department flagged his personal and corporate accounts simultaneously. What are you talking about? Ashley snapped, though the aggressive edge in her voice was rapidly dissolving into pure, unadulterated panic. Fraud. Kevin does not commit fraud. He is a senior vice president. He was a senior vice president, I corrected her smoothly. Past tense. He has not been an executive since 7:45 this morning. The logistics firm he worked for hired an outside agency to conduct a comprehensive forensic audit of his entire division. They tracked every single offshore routing pathway, every forged vendor invoice, and every shadow account he set up to siphon money out of their corporate treasury. He was fired for gross Tier 1 embezzlement this morning. A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over the line. For a fraction of a second, the background noise of the chaotic airport terminal seemed to vanish, leaving nothing but the sound of my sister processing the sudden violent destruction of her entire identity. Her designer wardrobe, her luxury vehicles, her country club memberships, and her endless social media bragging were all financed by stolen money. The perfect superior life she had weaponized against me for a decade was a complete and utter illusion. You are insane, Ashley whispered. Her voice was trembling so violently I could barely hear her. You are making this up. You are sitting in your pathetic little apartment trying to ruin my life because you are jealous. You have no way of knowing what his company does behind closed doors. You are a nobody. I took a slow, calming breath, savoring the absolute pristine air of the first-class cabin. I know exactly what his company does behind closed doors. Ashley? I said, my words cutting through the digital connection like a surgeon's scalpel. I know because they hired my firm to conduct the investigation. The agency that audited his division, the team that tracked his stolen funds, and the forensic accountants who built the criminal case against him work for Apex Global Logistics. I paused, letting the name hang in the air between us before delivering the final catastrophic blow. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Global, Ashley. I built the firm from nothing. I own it entirely. I personally oversaw the audit that brought your husband down, and I signed his termination recommendation papers exactly 1 hour ago. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The sheer unfiltered chaos that erupted on the other end of the line was a symphony of absolute destruction. Ashley let out a guttural, blood-curdling shriek that forced me to pull the phone slightly away from my ear. The device captured the sharp, unmistakable sound of a physical scuffle. Ashley had dropped her luggage and turned completely feral. "Is it true?" Ashley screamed, her voice completely devoid of its usual manufactured high society polish. "Kevin, look at me right now. Is she telling the truth? Did you steal that money? Tell me she is lying, Kevin. Tell me right now." Through the tiny speaker, I could hear Kevin stuttering. The arrogant, condescending man who had mocked my career and treated me like a peasant at every family gathering was currently reduced to a pathetic, whimpering mess. "Ash, baby, please." Kevin stammered, his voice cracking wildly. "It is a misunderstanding. It is just a temporary corporate misallocation. I was going to put the money back. I just needed to secure the Hawaiian deposit to keep you happy. I was going to fix it." He did not deny it. He could not deny it. Surrounded by airport police holding a confiscated credit card and facing immediate federal detention, Kevin Bradley's entire house of cards had spectacularly collapsed. "You stole from your company." Ashley wailed, the reality of her impending poverty hitting her with the force of a freight train. "You bought my car with stolen money. You bought this vacation with stolen money. The police are standing right here. You are going to prison. What am I supposed to do? I have no money. I have no job. You ruined my life." The audio feed became a tangled mess of overlapping screams. Ashley was sobbing hysterically, hitting Kevin in the chest while he desperately tried to calm her down in front of the recording bystanders. But then a new voice entered the fray. Linda had clearly abandoned her frantic attempts to secure a bank loan and had rushed back to the check-in counter to witness the implosion of her golden child's marriage. "Ashley, what is happening?" Linda demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Why are the police here? Why is Kevin crying?" "He is a criminal, Mom," Ashley screamed back at her. "He embezzled millions of dollars. We are bankrupt. We have absolutely nothing. And Michelle did it. Michelle owns the company that investigated him. Michelle is a CEO and she set us up." I listened as the terrifying weight of that revelation crushed my mother. I could practically hear the gears in Linda's head grinding to a violent, sparking halt. For her entire adult life, Linda had worshipped Kevin. She had treated him like royalty, showering him with praise and deferring to his every whim because he represented the wealth and status she desperately craved. She had enabled his arrogance, celebrated his toxic behavior, and actively participated in my psychological torment just to stay in his good graces. Simultaneously, she had spent decades actively destroying her relationship with me. She had called me a failure. She had mocked my ambitions. She had treated me as nothing more than a convenient scapegoat and an unpaid servant. In one horrifying, reality-shattering moment, Linda realized she had backed the wrong horse. She had spent her entire life worshiping a fraudulent criminal, while literally throwing away the daughter who had quietly built a multi-million-dollar corporate empire. Michelle, Linda gasped into the phone. Ashley must have dropped the device on the counter and Linda had snatched it up. "Michelle, please tell me this is a sick joke. Tell me you did not do this to your own family." "I did not force Kevin to break federal law." "Mom," I replied, my voice completely serene, "I simply exposed the truth. You demanded that I adhere to the midnight deadline for your bridge loan. I adhered to it. I let the clock run out, and the consequences of your financial negligence have finally arrived." "But my house—" Linda sobbed, the sheer terror of her own financial ruin bleeding into her voice. "I leveraged my equity for Ashley's wedding. I need that bridge loan to cover the balloon payment on my mortgage. If Kevin is bankrupt, he cannot pay me back. I will lose the house, Michelle. I will be homeless. You have to help me. If you are a CEO, you have the money. You have to wire the funds right now to save my home." The audacity was breathtaking. Even while standing in the wreckage of a federal crime surrounded by police and public humiliation, her first instinct was to demand my money. She felt entirely entitled to the wealth I had built, despite spending her life trying to tear me down. She believed she could simply snap her fingers and force me back into my designated role as the family savior. "You have absolutely no right to ask me for anything, Mom," I said quietly, letting the finality of the statement sink into her bones. You made your choices. You chose to prioritize Kevin and Ashley over my basic human dignity. You chose to treat me like garbage. You threatened to permanently disown me if I did not wire you money to fund a luxury vacation I was not even invited to. I am your mother! Linda cried out, her voice cracking with desperate manipulative panic. You cannot abandon your mother. You abandoned me decades ago, I corrected her. The tone of my voice was icy, detached, and utterly impenetrable. You only want me now because you realize I hold the keys to your survival. But the bank is closed, Mom. The account is permanently shut. You and Ashley are going to have to figure out how to survive in the real world without stolen money and without my compliance. Michelle, please do not hang up, Linda begged. You cannot leave us here like this. The police are putting handcuffs on Kevin. They are taking him away. Ashley is on the floor. Please, Michelle, you have to fix this. A soft chime echoed through the cabin. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming us aboard and announcing our imminent departure for the South Pacific. The flight attendant walked past my suite, offering a warm, reassuring smile as she prepared the cabin for takeoff. I looked out the window. The heavy dark clouds that had hung over my life for 30 years were finally breaking. I saw my reflection in the polished glass. I did not look like the exhausted, terrified woman who had walked into that coffee shop days ago. I looked powerful. I looked unburdened. I looked entirely free. Have a wonderful trip to the terminal parking lot, Mom, I said softly. I hear the budget buses run every 15 minutes. I pulled the phone away from my ear, cutting off the sound of Linda's desperate wailing screams. I pressed the red button ending the call. I did not just hang up the phone. I severed the toxic, suffocating anchor that had chained me to their misery for my entire life. With a swift, decisive motion, I powered the device down completely. The screen faded to black. I slipped the phone into a small, zippered compartment in my tote bag, zipped it shut, and pushed the bag beneath the seat in front of me. They were gone. They were erased. They would never, ever drain my energy again. I leaned back into the plush leather seat and closed my eyes. The massive jet engines roared to life, a deep, powerful vibration that resonated through my chest. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted smoothly into the bright, clear morning sky, I felt a profound sense of absolute peace wash over me. The world below grew smaller and smaller until the toxic family I had left behind was nothing more than an invisible speck in the distance. The heavy jet banked smoothly over the Pacific Ocean, leaving the gray coastline of the mainland far behind. I sat in the quiet luxury of the first-class cabin, listening to the steady, reassuring hum of the engines. My corporate smartphone rested on the polished walnut table beside me. The screen remained dark and entirely silent. I had not stayed on the line to listen to their inevitable, desperate apologies. I had not stayed to hear Kevin stutter through his pathetic justifications, nor had I lingered to absorb the sound of Ashley's frantic, wailing screams as the airport police escorted her husband away in handcuffs. The moment the full reality of their destruction had registered in my mother's horrified gasps, I had delivered my final piece of communication. I had typed a single definitive text message into the family group chat that had tormented me for years. Enjoy the airport. I did not wait for the delivery confirmation. I immediately opened my contact settings and systematically blocked Linda, Ashley, and Kevin. I did not stop there. Using the aircraft's high-speed satellite network, I logged into my cellular provider's portal and permanently deactivated the phone number they had used to harass, belittle, and command me for my entire adult life. The digital bridge connecting me to their toxicity was instantly and irrevocably incinerated. I was completely unreachable. There would be no tearful voicemails begging for a second chance. There would be no furious emails demanding legal bailouts. They were trapped in the wreckage of the fraudulent life they had worshipped, and I was ascending to a completely different stratosphere. I turned my head to look across the wide aisle. Caleb and Lily were fast asleep in their expansive lay-flat suites. They were tucked beneath crisp white duvets, their faces relaxed and utterly peaceful. For the first time since they were born, I looked at my children without the suffocating heavy blanket of anxiety resting on my chest. I did not have to worry about intercepting my mother's cruel, backhanded comments before they reached their young ears. I did not have to shield them from my sister's narcissistic tantrums. They were safe. I had protected them not by shielding them from the world, but by completely removing the poison from our environment. I had severed the diseased branches of our family tree so that my children could finally grow in the sunlight. The sheer magnitude of what I had accomplished washed over me in slow, powerful waves. I had not just survived their abuse, I had outsmarted them. I had built Apex Global Logistics from a tiny, self-funded operation into an industry titan operating entirely in the shadows, while my family dismissed me as a pathetic failure. I had weaponized their own arrogance against them. Their absolute certainty that I was a worthless, invisible nobody was the exact blind spot that allowed me to systematically audit Kevin's division, expose his Tier 1 embezzlement, and legally dismantle their stolen empire without them ever suspecting a thing. 36 hours later, the contrast between the life I had left behind and the reality I had forged was breathtakingly clear. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting a brilliant, blinding path of liquid gold across the surface of the South Pacific. The sky was an impossible canvas of vibrant tangerine, deep magenta, and soft, bruised purple. The air was thick with the sweet, intoxicating scent of wild plumeria and warm sea salt. I stood barefoot on the pristine, powdery white sands of our private stretch of beach in Fiji. The warm, crystal-clear turquoise water lapped gently over my toes, pulling the soft sand away with the receding tide. 50 yards down the shoreline, Caleb and Lily were splashing happily in the shallow surf. Their joyous, unfiltered laughter echoed over the sound of the ocean. They had spent the entire afternoon exploring the vibrant coral reefs right outside our private oceanfront villa, using the marine biology kits the flight concierge had given them. They were covered in sunscreen and sand, utterly carefree, entirely unburdened by the heavy, oppressive expectations that had defined my own childhood. A uniformed attendant from the villa walked gracefully across the beach carrying a silver tray. He approached with a warm, genuine smile and offered me a tall, frosted glass filled with fresh, tropical fruit juices and a slice of toasted coconut. I thanked him quietly, wrapping my fingers around the cold, sweating glass. I turned my gaze back out toward the endless, uninterrupted horizon. There were no cell phones buzzing with manufactured emergencies. There were no sharp, cutting criticisms about my wardrobe, my career, or my value as a human being. The suffocating tension that used to grip my shoulders so tightly it caused physical pain had completely dissolved. The air around me felt incredibly light. For 3 decades, I had believed that I needed their validation. I had believed the narrative they force-fed me that I was the scapegoat, the disappointment, the daughter who would never measure up to the impossible glittering standards of the golden child. I had exhausted myself trying to earn a seat at a table where the game was entirely rigged against me. I had drained my bank accounts, sacrificed my mental health, and compromised my own dignity just to keep the peace in a family that thrived on war. But standing here breathing in the clean tropical air, I realized the absolute truth. The ultimate sweet revenge was not freezing Kevin's bank accounts. It was not orchestrating Ashley's public humiliation in the middle of a budget airport terminal. It was not watching my mother realize that the wealthy son-in-law she worshipped was a criminal fraud, while the daughter she despised was a self-made multimillionaire. Those things were merely the mechanical consequences of their own horrific actions. The true lasting revenge was this exact moment of profound, unshakable serenity. It was the realization that their opinions, their judgments, and their endless toxic demands held absolutely zero power over my life. They were small, miserable people, trapped in a prison of their own design, desperate for status, desperate for money, and entirely empty inside. I took a slow, refreshing sip of my tropical drink. The sweet, tart liquid was cold and grounding. I looked down the beach at my children, who were now excitedly pointing at a small crab scurrying across the wet sand. I had reclaimed my dignity. I had secured my children's future. I had built an empire entirely on my own terms with my own hands using my own brilliant mind. I had won the game by simply realizing I never needed to play it. I did not need their love, their approval, or their acceptance. I was entirely beautifully whole without them.